In fly fishing, there are people we refer to as ambassadors or legends of the sport. Why is that? Can they catch fish? Sure, but it's way more than that. These are people that set that standard and then go like 3 clicks above it. These are the fly fishers that are constantly learning, constantly trying to make themselves better. These are the fly fishers that we look up to. Why do we look up to them? Very simple. They give us the information. They teach us how to become better fly fishers along the way. That's why we name them as our ambassadors and our legends of the sport. And I've been very lucky to fish with, interview, and spend time with these ambassadors of fly fishing. But it's more than that. There are so many lessons to be learned from these ambassadors of our sport. And I'm going to share some of those lessons with you today. Stay tuned. They don't give up, like ever. The first legend I'm going to talk about is Mr. Joe Humphreys. I have known and watched Mr. Humphreys for years. I first was introduced to him whenever I was a little boy, and my father took me to this fly casting demonstration from this famous fly angler from central Pennsylvania. His name was Joe Humphreys, and he did this bow and arrow cast and shot his fly and all of his line out of his hand, and it was like magical. Fast forward all of those years, over 30 years later, and I recently had the chance to fish with and interview Joe. He was 94 years old at that time. It was supposed to be a 30-minute long interview where we just talked about a stream that he loved, but it became much more than that. After the interview, we toured his house. Then we went downstairs. Joe tied a fly. It was such a wonderful fly, and he was taking his time and demonstrating. And then all of a sudden, he took the fly out of the vise and he looked at me and he said, "All right, Tim, it's time to go catch a fish on this fly." So we took off. We went to a nearby stream and Joe started to fish. 94 years old, high sun that day, hot day. I was sweating, just walking back and forth with my camera. And Joe didn't stop all day. Why didn't he stop? Because legends don't stop. They don't give up. Joe is known for having this just tenacity, this non-stop drive. What's really special about Joe, he has really just fell in love with nighttime fishing. There are tons of stories about him just fishing all evening long and then just going out all night long as well, because he knows trout don't have eyelids. They can definitely see better at night. They're more comfortable coming out and eating. That's when he catches his big fish. Back to the day we were on the water, Joe had these fish that were eating his fly, but they didn't love it. He didn't give up. What did he do? He changed his fly. He changed his approach. He changed his style of cast. He changed where he was fishing. He marched up and down this river for what seemed like miles. Joe never gave up, and you're darn right he caught a fish. How many times do you think we changed flies there?
A couple times. I went from large to small, then back to large, because the broken water, they can see it better.
But the story gets even better, because after he caught that fish, it wasn't big enough. I had to go home, but Joe was like, "Hey, I'm not leaving. I'm staying. I'm gonna catch another fish."
I'm not done. I'll get another one.
And guess what? Of course he did. Our ambassadors travel light. The next legend I want to talk about is Tom Rosenbauer. He's an ambassador of our sport, and he's kind of known and synonymous with Orvis fly fishing. He hosts the Orvis Fly Fishing podcast, and he's invited me to come fish with him up in Vermont. I spent a day with him chasing brook trout on these beautiful streams with this Orvis bamboo fly rod. It was magical. We just had such a great experience, and I learned so much from him. But at one point, I kind of looked at me compared to him, and I had all this gear on me, and he had like nothing. He had one small fly box. He had a little bit of some fly powder. At one point, we couldn't get the hook out of the fish's mouth. I said, "Oh, just use your hemostats." He said, "Yeah, I lose those all the time, so I just don't carry them anymore." Tom travels light, and there's something really important to be said about that. Tom works for Orvis and has access to some of the best fly fishing gear in the world. Yet he had his little hip pack, some tippet, some flies, some fly floating, maybe something to munch on as a snack, and that was it. Because he's realized this is about fishing. It's about making the proper presentation after you found the fish. Those are the most critical things. All this extra gear that we just tend to fall in love with is just that. It's extra gear. Is Tom an excellent fly fisher? Yes. Did he catch fish when I was with him? Absolutely. Was his interview spot on? Yes, those videos were great that we did together. But my biggest takeaway from Tom is that he traveled light, he's very efficient, he's very precise, and most importantly, he's intentional in everything he does. We can learn from that as fly fishers. When Tom Rosenbauer invites you fly fishing, what does he invite you to fish for?
Whatever's biting.
Yes.
Whatever's biting.
Before we continue, please pause and like this video, which tells me you enjoyed this style of video and you'd like to see more like it. Thank you ahead of time. Our ambassadors think different. They do what you don't. Our next three are the youngest members in my Legends video, but these are all competitive fly fishers that just catch fish wherever they go. Their names are Devin Olson, Pat Weiss, and Josh Miller. These are just three exceptional fly fishers. They're part of the group of individuals that I interviewed for my new book on Euro nymphing. It's a book of some of the best flies out there. I know I just said a moment ago, you don't need a lot of stuff. You definitely need this book. Look down below in the description of this video to buy an autographed copy from me. So why do I consider these three legends of our sport? I mean, for starters, they're all part of the competitive fly fishing scene. They've all fished for Fly Fish Team USA, and Josh is now the coach for the youth team. But more importantly, they do stuff that just not every angler does. For Devin Olson, he's one of those anglers that he is constantly making himself a better fly fisher. Every time he's out on the water, he's out there pushing himself to learn something new. Part of Fly Fishing Team USA, Devin is that individual that would invite other anglers in from all around the world, the top anglers from around the world, to teach the team and make them better. He was just absolutely absorbing all that information and then applying it to the water the next time he fished. That's super important. He wouldn't just say to himself, I'm going to take all these skills that I learned that I know I'm really good at and just practice those a little bit more. He kept learning. He continues to learn from all these other top anglers around the world. Pat Weiss is a fellow Pennsylvania angler. Pat is known for this technique called floating the sighter, where he's Euro nymphing. However, his entire line is on the water. No one fishes like that. I spent a day with Pat to learn this system. It kind of hurt my brain as he was constantly explaining and formulating it and getting his leader dialed in and making the right cast for this system. After Pat taught me this system, I went to a river and tried it out. But this wasn't just any river. This was a river that gets tons of people, lots of fish, and they are really pressured fish. They're tough to catch. I put myself in position. I started casting, and I pretty much caught or missed a fish on every single cast. This system was scary good, and it's one that Pat came up with on his own. When he would get to the river and he would have a problem fishing, he would try to figure out a solution. This system is his solution. It helps him catch fish. There's a reason that when other anglers are in the room, I'm talking about some of the top anglers from around the world, and Pat starts to talk, everyone else stops talking. They want to hear exactly what he's going to say. Josh Miller's from the Pittsburgh region like me, and I'm able to spend more time with him than pretty much anyone else on this list. But what really sets Josh out with Euro nymphing is that he's kind of taken it to another level. He's written the book on Euro nymphing. It's literally called Euro nymphing. It's a highly popular book, and it talks about his strategies. I recommend you check it out. There's a link down below in the description of this video. But what's the next level? Josh uses this technique called dry dropper. And it's not like the dry dropper that the rest of the world uses. It's not like you tie in your dry fly, you got your fly down below, it's a chubby Chernobyl, some type of hare's ear, and you cast it out, and when the fish eats the nymph, the dry fly goes down. It is much more than that. I spent a day on the river with Josh, and I had kind of known the system, but then he showed me his version of the system, and it kind of blew my mind, because that dry fly was suspended just enough that the moment anything touched that nymph, it went down. Fishing that on a micro thin leader worked really well, but it was nothing new for me. However, Josh said, well, wait, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And he had 3 more techniques to use with his dry dropper system, techniques I never even thought of. But just like everybody else, he shared them with the world. You can go and listen to Tom Rosenbauer's podcast because he interviewed Josh and they talked about nothing but dry dropper for that entire podcast. Again, legends of our sport, they're constantly sharing with everyone else. They value casting. There is nothing worse than that quote where someone says, hey, as long as you get your fly out there, you can catch fish. That's BS. The top anglers in the world know how to cast and they're very, very good at it. Let's just take a lake setting. The further you can cast, the more access you have for fish to see your flies. That's really simple math. But when you get to rivers and streams, that precise location of your fly placement absolutely matters. Whenever I'm thinking about dry fly fishing, the importance of an aerial mend or a reach cast matters whenever you're making those casts and you have that fish that's just eating in such a small window. In Euro nymphing, it's not just about chuck it and duck it. Whenever I've fished and seen these high-end Euro nymphers on the water, they have very precise casts because they're casting to specific regions because they know they only want to make X amount of casts before they move on to another segment. Putting that fly right where they need to be matters. It's very tough to do, especially when you go with these really light lines that many of them are using. And I love to throw articulated streamers, but get out there with your sinking line, your intermediate line on a day with a lot of wind, and it is darn tough to try that double haul. Casting matters, and everyone I've mentioned prior to on this list, they know what they're doing when they get in that realm. Joe Humphreys, he's a left-handed caster, and he just made these magical casts exactly where he wanted to. Tom Rosenbauer, we were chasing these brook trout, and he knew precisely where to place that fly so that fish would come up and just slam the dry fly. When Devin Olson qualified for Fly Fishing Team USA, the first thing those anglers had to do was a casting competition. Let's just say he's a little bit better than proficient. With Pat Weiss on the water, he was making these precise casts. He was telling me exactly where he wanted his leader to turn over in the air, and if you turned it over at this point, your fly would dive at this depth, but if you waited, you turned it over at this point. It was so complex, and it was all about the casting. Not the way he held his rod during the drift, but the cast in the air on how he wanted that fly to react to every single movement of that rod tip. When I fished with Josh Miller this year in central Pennsylvania, at one point we were standing in the river talking and I handed him my rod. He used his little frisbee cast to throw this dry dropper about 45 or 50 feet. You heard that right, dry dropper, micro thin leader, 45 or 50 feet. That doesn't happen by accident. Yet who's the legend I really want to reference? It's none other than Mr. Lefty Kreh. No, I've never interviewed Lefty, but whenever I was a little boy, my father took me to the fly fishing show, and at one point, Lefty was doing a casting demonstration, and then he asked for a volunteer from the audience, and my dad pushed his son right to the center, and Lefty grabbed onto me and pulled me up and introduced me to the crowd. Even though I was a teenager, I practiced casting outside on my lawn all of the time. In my mind, I was a pretty decent caster, and I was about to show everyone else just how good I was. Lefty handed me his rod. And yes, I was a little bit nervous, but I got into my stance and I started to make my cast. And as I came back with my back cast, Lefty grabbed onto my right arm and held it up where I was standing. And my right arm was nothing like this. At that time, it was high. It was real high like this. And Lefty Kreh, loud into his microphone, introduced me as the Statue of Liberty to the entire crowd. I just found out I wasn't a very good caster yet. Was I embarrassed? Absolutely. But I just got instruction from the best fly caster on the face of this earth. He taught me that as I was making my back cast, I was raising my right arm too high. That whenever I came forward for my forward cast, remember, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Pretty sure Lefty used that one in his presentation. My forward cast was getting driven down, causing my fly line to really hit the water with force, scaring all the fish. Do you think I read every piece of literature on Lefty Kreh from that point forward? You're darn right I did. Freshwater, saltwater, lakes, rivers, doesn't matter. Value your casting, make yourself a better casting, and those fish will follow. Before I share the last lesson learned, I'm curious to hear from many of you. I know you've had contact with all these individuals and more, these ambassadors and legends of fly fishing, and I guarantee you had different takeaways than I did. So down below in the comment section, tell me what you learned from these ambassadors, from these legends, and from all the legends that you've met along the way. They all tie their own flies. That's important to note, that each one of these individuals is a fly tyer. Anytime they're going out fishing, they're able to sit down at their bench and tie a fly to match exactly what they want it to do, exactly what they're seeing in their head. They know how it's going to react in the water because they tied it. They know how much weight's in it. They know if those materials are going to absorb or shed water. They know how it's gonna wiggle because they're the ones who crafted that fly. I think that's a very important component of fly fishing. Sure, you can go to a local fly shop, pick out some flies from bins. You can even contract fly tyers. But I think it's really important to note that whenever you have a problem on the water, you're able to go home and solve that problem, figure out that fly at your fly tying bench. So for anyone out there who's saying to themselves, I'm not sure if I should start tying flies or not, you just heard that list of names. Every single one of them ties flies. You should too. I've been lucky to fish with interview, record, and spend time with so many legends of the sport that we love. And I put all of those videos together into a playlist just for you. That playlist should have just popped up onto the screen. Don't stop that fun yet. Click that playlist, enjoy those videos, and learn from the legends of the sport.